This video on imperatives in Attic Greek covers the material in section 89 of Hansen and Quinn's Greek, an intensive course, and in the book you'll find that on pages 305 to 313. If we look at all of the elements of verbs that we've been covering, you know that we've covered these tenses in various forms and these moods, and we've looked at all three voices and all three persons and pretty much just the singular and plural, a number. And you'll notice there's a glaring omission here, and that is the imperative mood. The imperative mood is how Greek expresses commands. It's actually the same name we have for the same mood in English. When we tell somebody, sit down, that's the imperative. So the imperative in Greek takes care of direct commands when we tell somebody to do something. We've had ways to talk about people doing or not doing things and wanting that to happen. We've used the hortatory subjunctive in the first person to urge somebody to do something, to urge ourselves or a group of people with us to do something. We have been able to tell people not to do things with the prohibitive subjunctive, and we've been able to wish that somebody does something with the optative of wish. But now we're going to be able to make direct commands. The imperative mood in Greek comes in both present and aorist tense, and that is going to indicate aspect only. It's going to come in all three voices. It's only going to be in the second and third person, but we will get it in singular and plural. So that's actually quite a bit to cover, and so this video will be one of the long ones. Let's start with the present imperative active. It's going to be, as all present forms are, from the first principal part, and we'll add some endings. And here are what the endings look like. Eto, eta, and onton. The default translation is the command. In the second person, both singular and plural, it'll sound really familiar. It's exactly what our commands sound like. Verb, do this. In the third person imperative, which English doesn't have a separate form for, we're going to have to use the construction let somebody do something. So let her verb, or let him verb, or let it verb for the singular, and let them verb for the plural. We don't really do the direct command to a third party, and this is as close as English gets. Recessive accent, even onto the prefix, despite what you've learned about compound verbs. So the general rule for compound verbs is that the accent doesn't recede beyond the main part of the verb or the augment, but in an imperative verb, it can go even onto the prefix. Notice that the second person plural ending is the same as the present indicative active ending, so use context to tell the difference. And be careful about the third person plural imperative, which looks a lot like, in fact exactly like, the genitive plural masculine or neuter participle present active. So keep those things in mind, those possibilities. It's much more often going to be the indicative with the second person plural, or the participle in the third person plural, because imperatives are a little more rare. But that's what we're learning right now. So remember, now we also have to look at the variations of these endings for contract verbs. So here are the endings for already contracted for alpha contract verbs. So we get a and ato, ata and onton. If the accent is going to fall on the contracted ending, I've gone ahead and put it in there. Here are the endings already contracted for epsilon contract. We get a and ato in the singular, and eta and unton in the plural. And then for omicron contract, we get u and uto in the singular, and uta and unton in the plural. But now let's look at an example of the conjugation with luo, our old favorite, not contract verb. So we're going to have the first principal part, and we're going to use the stem from that, and we're going to add our new endings, and we're going to put in recessive accent, and the translation of lue, lueto, lueta, luantone are all going to be imperatives which we express in English as destroy in the second person and let her destroy or let them destroy in the third person. All right, let's move on to the present imperative, middle or passive. This will be, again, the first principal part plus the endings that you're going to get. And those endings are u, which is a contraction of coming from the form essa. You see the second person singular of the secondary person markers. You've got the saw there, but the intervocalic sigma drops out, and the epsilon and the omicron combine. And so we get u. And then there's estho, esthe, and esthone. The default translation in the middle is cause to be verbed in the second person singular, or of course the imperative of whatever the special middle meaning is of the verb you happen to be dealing with, or let him, her, it, them cause to be verbed in the third person. In the passive, it's going to be verbed, or let them be verbed, or let him be verbed, or let her be verbed, or let it be verbed in the third person. The accent is recessive, again with that exception to compound verb rules where it can go back even onto the prefix. Here in the present imperative, middle, and passive, we have the same issue with the second person plural, where the form is exactly the same as the present indicative middle passive. So keep an eye out for that and remember that you've got both possibilities. If we go on to the endings that you'll need for the imperative of the middle or passive for contract verbs, we're going to get these endings for alpha contract. So you can see the contraction math over on the left side and the resulting endings there. And again, I've gone ahead and put the accent over the ending if the accent is going to end up there in your final form. So in the alpha contract, we'll get o and astho in the singular, and astha and asthone in the plural. For epsilon contract, we'll get u and astho in the singular, and astha and asthone in the plural. And then for omicron contract, it will be u and ustho in the singular, and ustha and usthone in the plural. Couple of notes here. Be careful of that omega at the end in your alpha contract verbs. Remember that you've already seen that ending, say with timo as the present indicative active first person singular, and also as the present subjunctive active first person singular. So remember now with that ending, you've got three possibilities, and one of them is the present imperative, middle or passive second person singular. Also, in the omicron contract verbs, that second person singular u is only different from the active imperative second person singular because of the accent. In the active, the accent doesn't end up falling on the ending. In the middle or passive, it does fall on the ending. So there you've got both possibilities, but the accent can help you distinguish which is which. Okay, let's look at what happens when we put these forms together with luo. We'll take that first principal part and its stem, and we'll add our new endings, and we'll put our recessive accent over those forms. And so we'll get luu and luesta in the second person, and that means ransom in the middle, because of course that's the middle meaning of luo. Or it means be destroyed if it's passive. Of course, it could be freed too. And then in the third person, luestho and luesthon becomes let her or them ransom, or let her or them be destroyed. And there you have the present imperative, middle, and passive. Let's go on then to the aorist imperative active. So again, imperatives only come in two tenses, the present and the aorist, but that means, of course, we still have many forms to learn. For the aorist imperative active, we will, no surprise, go from the third principal part and add new endings. And those endings are on, auto, ate, and ontone. The default translations are really just like the present imperative active. The only difference is going to be aspect. And it's so rare that you are going to do continuous aspect that I didn't even bother in the present default translations to say be verbing, although of course it could mean that. So here you have the same default translations that I gave you for the present imperative active. Accent is recessive, even onto the prefix if it's a compound verb. And here again, in the third person plural imperative, you need to be careful about confusing that form with the genitive plural, masculine or neuter participle. Probably it's going to be the participle, which is much more common form than the imperative, but you're going to have both possibilities. All right. If we put these endings with our familiar luo, we're going to take that third principal part. We are going to take the ending off to start getting our stem, but this is not indicative. So we need the unaugmented stem, and we're going to need it in the second and third person, in the singular and plural. We're going to add our new endings, and we're going to add our recessive accent. So we get luson and lusate in the second person imperative active, and that's going to mean destroy. And in the third person, we get lusato and lusantone, which is going to mean let her destroy, or in the plural, let them destroy. And it's very imperative, and it's quite the command. Now you notice I have all this white space on the right because of all that space I saved for the contract verbs, but we're not in the present tense anymore, and the aorist doesn't have contract verb exceptions, and so we don't have to do them. Let's move on then to the aorist imperative middle. Third principal part and endings, and those endings are I, astho, asthe, and asthone. Just doing the middle this time, so it's cause to be verbed, or let him, her, it, them cause to be verbed if it is in the third person. Or, of course, this will be the special middle meaning of whatever verb you're in. The accent, again, is recessive, even onto the prefix. And you should know here that that alpha iota at the end of the word in the second person singular is short for the purposes of accent, and that matters. You've had other places where alpha iota at the end of the word is long. Here we have luo. We go to the third principal part. We take that stem. We take off the augment and put on our new endings and put on our recessive accent. And we get lusai, lusasthe for ransom. And we get lusasto, lusasthone for let her ransom and let them ransom. Now, again, we get to have a nice happy dance over here because there are no contract verb endings, but I do want to show you something. This is a moment for me to show you why it's been so important for you to learn accents for your verb forms. So if we put this word here 3 times, paidao-sai, which is another familiar paradigm word, and we accent it 3 different ways, we get 3 different forms. So paidao-sai is the form that we've been working on here. This is the aorist imperative middle, and so the translation of paidao-sai, which is recessive all the way to the third to last syllable, and the alpha iota is short for the purposes of accent, so it can go all the way back there, and that means this verb, with this accent means cause to be educated. So paidelsai is a middle imperative, cause to be educated. Paidelsai also has recessive accent, but in that form, the alpha iota at the end of the word is long for the purposes of accent. And you may remember that that's an optative third person singular active form in the aorist. And so one way we could translate that would be, an optative of wish. And we would get, may she educate. So this is an active form, and that alpha iota at the end of the third person singular is long for the purposes of accent. And so recessive can only take the accent back to the second to last syllable. And the third example here, same letters, different accent, has that circumflex over the second to last syllable. So there, the alpha iota is short, but we've got fixed accent. And you may remember that that's the rule for the aorist infinitive active. And so paidelsai means to educate. I know you've been diligent about learning the rules for accent, especially with your verb forms, and here is one of the places that it pays off. So you can know just by looking at the accent on those forms which particular verb form you're looking at. All right, let's continue now with the imperative. Now, we didn't have to deal with contract verbs, but we do have to deal with second aorists. So here, it's going to follow the basic pattern we've had with all second aorists, which is that the endings look very much like the present, and you just have to put them on a different stem. So that stem, of course, will come from your third principal part. Your endings then are eto, ete, and ontone. And the default translation is the same as the first aorist. The accent is recessive, even onto the prefix. Again, we need to be careful in the third person plural about confusing it with a genitive plural participle. And if we use our default paradigm verb for the second aorist, lepo, we will take that third principal part, take off the ending. We're not indicative, so we'll take off the augment. We will add our new endings, eta, eto, and ontone. We will give it recessive accent. And what we'll get is lipe, lipeta to mean leave, and lipeto and lipontone to mean let her leave and let them leave. Very commanding. No contract verbs, so we get another happy dance. The second aorist middle, same idea. Third principal part and the endings, which are the same that you have for the present, imperative, middle, and passive. U, estho, esthe, and esthone. Accent is recessive again. Here we have one exception to that, which is the second person singular imperative for the second aorist has fixed accent on the ending. So I'm just going to put it there in the paradigm. Same default translation for the middle. Don't forget your middle meanings if you have them for the verb you're dealing with. And here's our paradigm verb, third principal part, stem, new endings. Accents. There is the fixed accent. That's the exception to our rule here. And then the recessive ones in the other forms. So lipu or lipesthe means cause to be left. And in the third person, lipestho and lipesthone means let her cause to be left or let them cause to be left. But we have no compound verb and extra endings, so I want another happy dance. Now, we've done everything except the passive, and that, of course, is because the passive is from a different principal part. So the aorist imperative passive comes from the sixth principal part, plus our new endings, and those endings are at, and there's another ending in the second person singular, and that is athi. But you'll find that at is used much more often because of the rule of dissimilation of aspirates, which we've talked about occasionally. It's a wonderful jargon word that says that Attic Greek doesn't like to do thethi or faithy. It likes to have only one aspirated consonant in a row. And so since most six principal part stems end in a theta or other aspirate, most of the time the ending for the second person singular is going to be AT to keep those aspirates away from each other. Occasionally, you will have a sixth principal part whose stem ends in an unaspirated consonant, like, for instance, eblabane, and therefore you can have the aspirated version of the second person singular ending and get blabathy to mean be hurt. But that's a pretty easy ending to see that it's the same thing as its alternative. Moving on, in the third person singular, we have ato, then eta, and entone. Accent is recessive. The default translation is be verbed, or let her, or him, or it, or them be verbed. And once again, we need to be careful in the third person plural not to confuse these forms with the genitive plural masculine or neuter participle. It's much more likely, again, to be the participle, which is going to be a much more common form than the imperative, because we don't do a lot of commanding of people, but you need to know that both forms exist. Then, if we try this out with our paradigm verb, we will go to the sixth principal part. We will take that stem, we'll take off the augment, we'll add our new endings. And here I'm doing the AT version because this stem does end in an aspirated consonant. So luthati sounds better than luthathi. And then we will add our accents. And what we get is luthati, luthata, which means be freed. And then luthato, luthentone, which means let her be freed or let them be freed. I decided to go for the positive in the passive and not destroy them. One last happy dance for having no alternative endings. This is what we have here, except for that aspirated and unaspirated consonant thing. And that is all you need to know to put together imperatives in Attic Greek. You ought to be able to do drills and read these forms happily now after a little bit of practice.